Good evening and welcome to what we hope over the next hour or so will be a virtual safe place to unpack the difficult subject matter of racial barriers in the classroom that students of color deal with every single day. We know the discussion of race can be difficult and everyone won't agree, but here are the facts. According to the U.S. Department of Education in 2014, Black students represented 19% of students with disabilities, but are a troubling 36% of those who are restrained at school. When Black students and white students commit similar infractions, Black students are suspended and expelled 3 times more often than white students. And Black students make up 16% of student enrollment, but represent 27% of students referred to law enforcement and 31% of those students subjected to arrest. Tonight, our community conversation is about hope, healing, and solutions. I'm Shon Gables at our CBS46 studio in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm joined by some of the brightest minds in education, law, commerce, and literacy. The superintendents of Atlanta and Clayton County Public Schools have joined us, Dr. Lisa Herring and Dr. MORCEASE BEASLEY. Nancy Flake Johnson, president of the Urban League of Greater Atlanta, joins us along with Janet STOVALL, executive communications manager with UPS. Deeren Dickerson, the chair of diversity and inclusion at Alston and Bird Law Firm, and we're also joined by best-selling authors Joel Parker Rhodes, Nick Stone, and Tiffany Joel. We even have a group of students from both Atlanta Public Schools and Clayton County Public Schools with their own prepared questions to ask our guests. We want to thank everyone for being here. And I want to start first with you, Dr. Herring. Literature, written history, storytelling, it is such a powerful tool to overcome stereotypes. Atlanta Public Schools is relaunching Race to Read. Why?
Well, we are relaunching because we recognize the importance of literacy and reading. Once you learn to read, you will forever be free. And those are profound words from Frederick Douglass. And yet more than 150 years after Douglass wrote them, so many in our community and in our schools remain deprived of the deep influence of reading. And many of our students are not armed with the power and strength of words. And because of that, we recognize that critical importance.
And Dr. MORCEASE BEASLEY, the prison system, it bases its populations off of reading levels of elementary students. Reading comprehension has become one of your top priorities.
Yes, as you well know, literacy, of course, is the gatekeeper to every subject that we study. So in Clayton County, we're very much committed to ensuring that all students have access to resources, great instruction, great reading instruction, and the ability to apply what they've read to think and to solve problems. And we have a wealth of opportunities at every grade level, all levels, for our students to, of course, always improve their reading and to always take it to another level.
We want it to go to another level, and we also find it as a great opportunity to educate. Let's talk to some of our authors now. Anti-racist arguments, they're really tearing communities apart. Joel Parker Rhodes, you authored Ghost Boys. How has your book, in your opinion, help heal the community?
Well, Ghost Boys, I think, one, allows students to see themselves in the character Jerome. It recognizes their pain, and that's very important. Every time someone discriminates or stereotypes a Black youth, it's stealing them of their childhood innocence. 2, my novel, I think, allows for empowerment for children to see that they can bear witness, that they can sort of commit to social justice, and that their actions and their words matter. And then 3, I think the book provides a kind of historical context for children to have a sense of the greater problem of, really assaulting America. I cite Emmett Till, his death in 1955, and I remember being at a school in Boston where a young kid said to me, "I've never heard of Emmett Till. I've always thought that when someone, looked at me or discriminated against me, that something was wrong with me." And he said to me, "Miss Rhodes, you mean this is a pattern?" Yes, it's a pattern, particularly towards Black boys and Black girls. And actually, when I was writing Ghost Boys, I came across a lot of information about the school to prison pipeline. And I actually put that in my new book, Black Brother, which has 2 brothers, one lighter skinned, one darker skinned. And the darker skinned brother is treated with bias, and he's arrested and carted off to jail. So these issues of blaming boys, girls for their own victimization, their own assault has got to stop. And that's what my books show. And in fact, one of the messages is that if someone can't see your glory, that's their problem. And that each and every one of our children of color, they just need to be themselves. I say, be you, even if others can't see you.
That is a powerful message. We have another author, Tiffany Jewell. You authored this book is Anti-Racist. How do you feel it helps teachers and principals confront their own biases?
We all have biases, and occasionally they can be good, but what we've seen in our schools and our education system is they're not. And it goes way back to the days of Brown versus the Board of Education, when all of our Black teachers were removed from schools and we forced assimilation into schools and integration on children instead of asking the teachers to do it. White teachers at that time didn't do any of the work to confront their biases and their prejudices. And that carried on for decades in teacher education programs and in our schools. When I was a student in the 80s, I saw it so clearly with all of my white teachers. And still now in the 2020s, we see it all the time. It's so important for teachers and principals and superintendents and school board members, everybody who basically works with children and as a proponent of humanity needs to confront their biases and prejudice, because if we don't, we're just going to keep being in this place of great inequity in our world, where white folks continue to think that and believe that they're superior, which they're not. Nobody is better than anybody else. But we are in that place right now, and we've been here for a long time.
For a long time.
Way too long.
Yeah, let's bring in Nick Stone now. Nick, you too are an author. You wrote Dear Martin. What is the value in having conversations about race early on and to talk about these stories over and over? And how do you appeal through books like yours to not to speak to people like us who are African American, who understand the journey that we're dealing with, but those who are not of color, who it's very hard for them to see our perspective because they've never lived it?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. So I have two sons. My sons are 4 and 8, a third grader and a pre-K kid. And my older son, the first time I took him to the King Center, he was 4 years old. And we get on the bus, like there's a bus that's there every year on MLK Day. And he tried to sit down at the front of the bus and I made him go to the back. And when I made him go to the back, he had this puzzled look on his face, but we had a quick conversation about why I asked him to move to the back of the bus. And I, put it very simply that there was a time in history where if you looked like you, or you looked like me, if you had the hour brown skin, there was only a part of the bus that you were allowed to sit on. So we get off the bus, we go in the house, we come back out, and I asked if he wanted to get back on the bus. I was going to let him sit wherever he wanted. And he said no. And that's the moment that I realized that kids at a very young age, they have their eyes open, they have their minds open to the world around them. And as parents, as educators, as the adults in these kids' lives, we kind of get to help shape the reality and how they perceive the world that they live in. I think it's vastly, deeply, wildly important that with the books that I'm writing, with the books that Jewell Parker Rhodes is writing, with the books that Tiffany is writing, we have this opportunity where we get to put into words and into a voice, into language that kids speak and can understand. We get to show them, we get to show the Black kids that hey, you are valuable. You can be the hero of the story. You can do really whatever it is you put your mind to. But then there's an emotional core of every story, people from across racial demographics, from across the socioeconomic spectrum, no matter where you come from, we all basically have the same set of base emotions, right? So we all get sad, we all get happy, we all have things that disappoint us. We all feel a way if we are falsely accused of something we did not do. So using that emotional core, that is the way that I try to get other people who are not African American to be able to enter into the shoes of a person who is African American and who is treated in a certain way in this country. So everybody, like I said, at some point has been falsely accused. Everyone at some point has felt left out or has felt out of place. And because of that, anyone can enter into the story that we're writing.
There's common threads, that's for sure. We have two groups of students, a group from Atlanta Public Schools and another group from Clayton County Public Schools, who want to ask our panelists a list of questions. We'll try to get in as many as we can, but I want to start with Atlanta Public Schools. We have an 11th grader who has a question proposed for Tiffany Jewell, one of our authors. Are you ready to talk?
Hello, Ms. Jewell. My name is KHAMAR Carlisle. I'm an 11th grader and I attend Thero High School. My question is, what do you suggest a young Black boy should do if he finds himself being arrested or stopped by the police without even breaking the law? And should he stay silent and just let it happen without incident, or should he let his voice be heard?
Thank you, Kamar. This question, whew. I have so many thoughts around this question. And my first thing is, I really hate that we have to ask this question. My suggestion is so different. I'm very light Black biracial woman. I do not have the same experiences as a Black man. And what I want is for Black boys and Black men to not be falsely accused and to not be pulled over by the police. And it's more of what I want the white folks to do. I want white folks to stand in solidarity, to witness, to speak up and stand out. I want all of the light folks, the non-Black folks, people who are light like me, to be the ones to stand up and speak out, because it's one of those things we've seen in our history. No matter what you do, it's not the right thing, depending on who's doing the arresting and who's stopping you. I personally don't remain silent. I speak up. And I also know that my life will be spared more than that of somebody who is much darker than me. So I want to encourage you to speak your voice and to share with the people who are arresting you and the people who are around you that you're being falsely accused, that this isn't right. And if you are there and there's nobody witnessing, I don't know. Like, I wish I had the answer for you, and I don't, Kamar. And this is something that I'm going to keep wrestling with. But it's really more of what I want the white folks and the light folks around young Black boys to do. I want them to stand up and take better care of the humans who are standing alongside them all the time.
It is gut-wrenching to have to hear a young Black male student to have to ask that question, but children are dealing with racism on a daily basis. These are tough questions, but thank you.
My name is KYLIN Potter. I attend Elite Scholars Academy and I'm in the 7th grade. My question for you is, do you recommend your book for just school-age students or for adults too? And if for adults, how many adults have commented about how it may have helped them?
Thank you, KYLIN. I've actually talked to a lot of adults who've used the book. And I think one of the things, and I personally love reading children's and young adult nonfiction because it gets to the point. A lot of adult nonfiction books have a lot of information that can feel really overwhelming. And I wrote the book thinking of everybody from 9-year-olds to 14-year-olds to the teachers teaching them and the families and caregivers working with the kids, because I wanted to give everybody the same language when we talk about racism and anti-racism. And if we all have the same language, if the 9-year-olds have the same language that the 45-year-olds have, that the 89-year-olds have, that the 16-year-olds have, then we can all like work on this together. But if we're reading different books and getting different definitions. And then we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we're all saying and talking about. So if we can read that same book, my book, if it is, then that has helped. And a lot of adults right now are using it as a way to kind of jumpstart their work in understanding anti-racism and making the world a place where our humanity is something that everybody cares about, and not just some people get to be human and some people don't.
Jewel, we appreciate your insight, and we're going to now switch to Tiffany. Jewel, well, thank you for your insight. Let's talk to Jewel Parker Rhodes. You also have a book, Ghost Boys, and that takes a historical perspective in your journey on your story. We have a student from Atlanta Public Schools, a fifth grader, who has a question for you.
So my name is GILLAM DUCKETT from Duke Charter School in APS. And my question is, in your book, Ghost Boys, Miss Penny, the librarian, was hesitant to share information with Sarah about Emmett Till. Do you think there is an inappropriate age at which his story should not be shared with students? If so, what age do you think is appropriate to share his story and other stories like his?
Great question. I actually think late elementary and up is an appropriate age to see the images, the brutality of Emmett Till's murder. The reason why I have Miss Penny hesitate is that I wanted teachers, librarians, and parents to really think of their responsibility when they show explicit graphic violence. And Miss Penny does, but that moment doesn't change her decision. She decides it's better for a child to know the truth, to see the truth, than to be ignorant of it. One of the reasons why I don't advocate younger children seeing pictures of Emmett Till is that I still remember when I was a toddler even, and every year thereafter seeing every anniversary of Emmett Till's death, pictures of him. And for 60 years, those images still haunt me. Yes, in one sense, they should haunt me because it gave me the call to action to write Ghost Boys. But on the other hand, I think that I have a trauma from it that was perhaps too much for me because I learned too much too soon. But I do think late elementary and up is a great time to begin to open up your perspective. And if you have a parent beside you, a teacher beside you, a librarian beside you, all the better, because we need you to know what the world is really like so you could tap into your power to make it better.
I like that you mentioned talking about tapping into your power, also thinking big. Ghost Boys really pushes that message. We have an 11th grader from Clayton County Public Schools for a question for you now, Jewel Parker Rhodes.
Hi.
Hi, Ms. Rhodes. My name is ALANA PITTMAN. I'm an 11th grader from Lovejoy High School. I just wanted to ask, in Ghost Boys, you wrote that he wished he known that the world was so much bigger and better than his neighborhood. Do you think this would change the world, the way young boys and girls see themselves, treat each other day to day?
Fantastic question. Absolutely. I actually lived in a very poor segregated community in Pittsburgh. I had no idea of the beauty that extended beyond my community, the jobs that extended beyond my community. I didn't even know white people existed until I went downtown when I was 5 years old. And I think not seeing things, you have your potential blunted. For my whole life, all the way through college, I was never assigned a book by a person of color. So though I wrote all the time, I didn't think that I could be a writer, that my stories mattered. And when I finally discovered as a junior in college a book in the library about a Black woman, it was like, hallelujah, I'm going to become a writer. I'm going to write books. So in some sense, I think the world conspires against us because of color, because of class, because of, just generalized oppression and distaste for Black people based on whites' warped perceptions of why they had to make us stereotypes in order to own us as slaves, that we've got to sort of break out, that we've got to realize that things are kept invisible to us, and so we need to be brave and bold. You need to explore. You need to go out into the world. Yes. So there are all kinds of ways to live and be, and people will hide that from you. So what you think you should say, well, that's good, but I want to try something else. I want to see something else. I want to feel something else. I'm going to travel somewhere else. And then a lifetime of doing that, I think you'll be a stronger, better person for it.
I like how you talk that we'll be a stronger, better person. But Jewel, we have a sixth grader from Atlantic Public Schools who has a question it's loaded with fear that help others perceive people of color, particularly when the skin is darker, as a threat. Zoe Cannon, can you ask your question?
Hi, Ms. Joel. My name is Zoe Cannon, and my question is, what do you think it will take for others to decide what people who look like Emmett and Jerome are no longer a threat or danger to society anymore?
I think conversations like the one we're having now, that I hope tons, thousands, millions of white people watch it. But I think in one sense, it is true that because of slavery, we have an original sin in America, an original wound, that we had a whole race of white people who at the time had to rationalize why they should own other human beings. And they did that by saying, well, people of dark skin aren't human, they're other. And that otherness, that prejudice continues down and down, retaught through the generations. So in some sense, while we have books like Tiffany Jewells and others that can sort of provide empathy for white people to understand, the people of color, I really want to advocate, you can't keep living your life waiting for somebody else to see you as you are. You can't wait your whole life. And Zora Neale Hurston said this, I'm glorious, wonderfully colored, that you've got to be proud and be bold, and you've got to be committed to speaking and living your truth. So don't wait for somebody to see you. Self-love is a core that's going to help you grow. So you love you. And if they don't see you, pshaw with that. Now, I know that sounds in some ways so simplistic, and I don't mean for it to sound simplistic, but you can't be responsible for changing every single person's hearts and minds. Everybody's got to learn that path for themselves. So be responsible for who you are, and through your actions, show people what it means to be a good woman, a good person, a good citizen, and somebody who really loves others as they love themselves.
And we have a ninth grader now who has another tough question for you, Jewel Parker Rhodes. And this one is about systemic racism. Justin Johnson, can you ask your question?
Hello, Ms. Rhodes. My name is Justin Johnson. First off, I'm a big fan of your book, Ghost Boys. But my question is for today. In the afterword in Ghost Boys, you wrote that you hope your youth will be able to dismantle personal and systematic racism, and that this could be achieved through discussion, awareness, and societal and civic actions. What is the first step that we must take to achieve this, and how can this be done?
One, what you're doing right now, becoming educated, okay? I am the first in my family to go to college. And by going to college, I was able to become a professor, become a writer, and have an impact on the world, but also an impact on my family. Like my daughter and my son, they went to college. My granddaughter's going to college. And we have this sort of expansion of using the skills that we've been given, the grace that we've been given to make the world better. So education is key. The second thing is that you must take your responsibility to make the world serious. I mean, you must take the responsibility to make the world better seriously. I tell every kid that when you turn 18, if you don't vote, I'm going to come haunt you. I'm going to be the ghost mama that's coming to make sure that you do it. That if you let somebody steal away that power, that right of yours to vote, then you aren't going to be able to make societal and civic action. There's also then that power of bearing witness. It's like when you see injustice, speak out. Do not be silenced. Do not let somebody stereotype and pigeon you and make your life this small. Your life is gigantic, and you go ahead and live it. And in doing that, you will impact your community, impact your family, your siblings, your church. You will touch more people than you can possibly imagine. But it all starts with education.
Let's bring in Nick Stone.
You're welcome.
An author of Dear Martin, a bestseller. We have a 9th grader from Atlanta Public Schools, who has a question for you.
Hi, Miss Stones. My question is there any part of Dear Martin that portrayed your personal experience growing up or the experience of someone you know?
Yeah, so look, the interesting thing about Dear Martin is so much of it is from my own personal experience, and some of it, yeah, is from people I know. There are a couple of characters that are based on people that I know. Manny in Dear Martin is based on a guy that I went to both middle and high school with, for instance. My favorite incident from the book to talk about, there's a scene in Dear Martin where the kids are in a classroom. They're all high school seniors, and they have all started getting either acceptances or deferments from their colleges of choice. And the main character, who's an African-American boy named Justice, has gotten accepted early into Yale. And the main antagonist is a white boy named Jared, who is in complete denial about the very existence of racism. He got deferred from Yale. So this conversation ensues in the classroom where Jared basically says that Justice only got into this college because he's Black, and because of affirmative action. And so they start having a discussion about their qualifications. And it turns out Justice actually had the higher ACT composite score. I pulled that whole scene from my own senior year of high school. I was the only African-American student in my AP language and composition class. I was sitting behind another student, a young lady. And I think I was talking about like an entrance interview into Duke or something. And she seemed a little taken aback, asked what my scores were. So we discussed our scores, and my ACT composite score wound up being like 2 points higher than hers. And she was aghast. She looked at me and said, "There's no way you got a higher score than me." And it was one of those defining moments for me. One of those moments when I recognized that no matter how hard I worked or successful I became, there would always be people. There are always going to be people who look at me and assume that I do not deserve the things that I have, or that I am not qualified to be in the position that I'm in. And you know what? I don't really care, because at the end of the day, that young lady is now following me on Instagram, and it's kind of a good feeling.
Yeah, when these students go back to their 20-year high school reunion, they'll know exactly what you mean by that comment. Let's bring in the 11th grader, ALANA Pittman from Clayton County Public Schools. Social unrest, Nick, has been the headlines for months across the nation. And ALANA, you have a question kind of regarding in that aspect.
Hello, Ms. Stone. I wanted to ask, young people have studied about protests in the 60s and how they are seeing them today. What do you tell them about protests and how they really work?
So I will tell you a very interesting story. I go into a lot of high schools, and I'm constantly having these conversations with young people. The difference between young people now and young people in the 60s is that, like, we don't really have any patience now, right? Like, we're so used to getting everything quickly. Like, you order a package, it shows up on your doorstep sometimes the same day. You hop on the internet, you need some information, you can get it instantly. There's no going into a library and having to go through an encyclopedia. I say all that to say that I do think that there is an expectation for the world and for change to happen as quickly as it does on the internet, right? There's this expectation that, like, okay, if I can get my package in 2 days, we can change the world in like a few weeks. And honestly, that's just not the case, right? If you look at the history of change, especially change that has to do with equity and equality in this country, it just takes a really long time. Protest does work. I think we can see evidence of that even in the fact that we're having this conversation right now. And it was just as bad. If you look through history, you look at some of the footage captured during the civil rights movement, you look at some of the photographs taken, things were just as bad then as they are now, if not worse. I actually would probably say they were worse. Nobody's pulling out fire hoses and unleashing dogs on teenage protesters these days. So to my young activists, just stay the course. Like, change comes slowly, but it does come.
And your book, Dear Martin, has really become very relatable to some high school students, particularly this ninth grader from Atlanta Public Schools. Introduce yourself, the name of your school, and ask your question.
Hello, Ms. Stone. I am Justin Johnson from Carver Early College, and my question for you today is, in your book, Dear Martin, Justice asked the question, what will Martin do? And later changed it to, what will Martin be? Thinking about the racial events of this year, what do you think Martin would be today?
I mean, he would be himself, right? I think the entire purpose of Dear Martin is for readers to come to the realization that at the end of the day, it's all about who you are. What kind of person are you going to be in spite of anything that changes or doesn't change in the world? If the world never changes, what kind of person are you going to be? How are you going to present yourself to the world? What are you going to be passionate about? What are you going to prioritize? And I think that Dr. King from the civil rights movement would be the same Dr. King today. He would be unflinching, unwavering. He would be, ready to kind of go for it, right? I think about the fact that just before his death, in a kind of eerie way, Dr. King, he gave a speech about potentially not making it to the end of the race. And as a person who was willing to lay down his life then for equality, I think he would be the same way today. And that same kind of unflinching commitment to seeing the world become a better place for everyone is something that we could all stand to kind of cultivate inside of ourselves.
And Nick, we have one last question. This is a fifth grader who wants more from you, I think so. Why don't you ask your question?
Hi, Ms. Stone. My name is GILLAM Duckett from Duke Charter School. And my question is, will you continue writing Shuri books and make it a series?
Absolutely, Gillam. I have to, right? Like, I think about the fact, so I write Shuri novels, prose novels for Marvel Comics, and they are the most fun I've ever had writing books. So the second one comes out February 2nd of next year. So be on the lookout for it. And hopefully there will be at least 3 more.
Okay,
we're going for it.
Nick, we are super excited. Our fingers are crossed for your next project to come out. You clearly have some fans here. Let's talk now to our administrators. You deal with children in the classroom. You have Black, white, Native American, Indian, East Indian, Latino students. You have a mix of them all, and you're trying to help build bridges constantly. We have a second grader from Clayton County Public Schools who has a question for Dr. Beasley, the superintendent of Clayton County School System.
Hi, Dr. Beasley.
Hello there.
What are some ways our teachers can help us to talk openly about racism in classes?
Well, that's a great question. The first thing I'll say is we want everyone to be very intentional. As I listen to all of the questions and the comments from the authors, I think we have to be very intentional. I often tell people, just like it was assumed that certain people would always be the image projected in our media, in stories, in books, etc., then we should assume that we should also do the very same thing for our students, for our community, for our various entities that we're a part of, for our colleagues, etc. So I think that we should first be intentional, but then we should understand the issue. You want your teachers to really understand what racism is. So that means we all have to study the issue. We have to read great books like your authors here have written. We should understand, we should research, we should inform ourselves, and then we should plan. You always want your teachers to plan for good instruction, for great conversations, for great discussions about this topic, and allow students to be engaged and to participate and to share honestly in a very safe space. But then we want our teachers to provide our students an opportunity to extend their learning by engaging in some type of activity. It could be a research project. It could be some type of social justice event. It could be some type of school level event that brings awareness and that expands and advances the conversation. So I think I would just want our teachers to think about you as a student, put themselves in your shoes, and what would you want, what would they want to occur if they were sitting in that classroom as a student?
We have a question from the president of the Urban League of Greater Atlanta Young Professionals. And Dr. Beasley, this really delves into the other side, not from the student's perspective, but people learn when it's much easier to learn, at least in my experience, when you have a teacher or an instructor who looks and acts like you and ate some of the same food you've eaten and understands your background. Michael, the president of Urban League of Greater Atlanta Young Professionals, ask your question. I thought this was very insightful.
Hi, Dr. Beasley. My name is Michael TWUM. I'm the president of the Urban League of Greater Atlanta Young Professionals. So over 2 decades, Gloria Ladson-Billings introduced the term culturally relevant pedagogy to describe a form of teaching that calls for engaging learners whose experiences and cultures are traditionally excluded from mainstream settings. So the question is, how important will it be to introduce Black culture, contribution, and their experiences for all students?
Well, Michael, that's a great question. And I'll tell you, just as it was important for the dominant culture to ensure that their children had access to images of who they were, it's equally and probably more important for children coming from Black, brown families and communities to see themselves in every aspect, in all the curriculum and the books that are used and the videos that are used in all ways. And so it's our expectation that our students see themselves. They should see themselves in their administrators. They should see themselves in their teachers. They should see themselves in the instructional process. Now, we are in various stages of that occurring, but I think it's very important, Michael, that even as it was assumed by the dominant culture that their children would see themselves, we should not apologize to assume that our children should see themselves in every way when it comes to our schools. It doesn't mean that they will not see others who do not look like them, but it is okay. And we've got to make sure our children understand that there should be no apology offered because you want to see yourself in your curriculum, in your textbooks, in the videos that are used. We don't apologize for that. No one has ever, no one should ever, and nor should our children, and nor should we apologize for that. So again, intentional, and it should be assumed that it will occur at every level.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I think that is very insightful there. We've talked to educators, we've talked to authors. Now we're going to bring in the law. Mr. Dickerson, he is an attorney and chair of diversity and inclusion with Alston and Bird. We have a 6th grader from Atlanta Public Schools with a question for you.
Hi, Mr. Dixon. My name is Zoe Cannon. I'm a 6th grader. My question is, what do you see as critical work within the legal community to bring healing and hope to students in Black communities?
Well, first, thank you for such an insightful question. I think we are at a pivotal moment in our nation's history, and I'm encouraged to see more and more people who are committed to the work of equity in their particular environments. When I think about the concept of hope and healing, particularly in the context of racial justice, I think that conversation necessarily has to include the legal community. Justice is the realm in which we work. Justice is our domain. And when we look at our country's history, lawyers have played a pivotal role in every aspect of social change in promoting justice. Perhaps Thurgood Marshall is the most prominent example of that and his work during the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, great leaders like Martin Luther King and John Lewis were out getting into good trouble and shining a spotlight on the injustices cast upon Black people. But people like Thurgood Marshall and other lawyers were fighting the good fight in the courtrooms, getting unjust laws overturned. And so the role that I see the legal community playing is to promote healing and to restore hope by serving as advocates, advocating for fairness, advocating for equity and equality, and advocating on behalf of students. Earlier this year, I represented a young Black student in a disciplinary proceeding. She was being bullied at school and picked on, and eventually she got fed up and she fought back. She wasn't the initiator, she wasn't the aggressor, but the school suspended her. They expelled her from school. And we've talked earlier today about how Black students are punished more severely than white students. She was expelled from school. And so I represented her in the disciplinary appeal to get her expulsion overturned. And we were fortunate to get her back in school so that she can continue her education and make something of her life. But those are the types of things that lawyers can do to really help advocate on behalf of students in our community.
Mr. Dickerson, you're probably inspiring some of our students to go into the profession of law. We have a 7th grader with Clayton County Public Schools has another question for you.
Hi, Mr. Dickerson. My name is KYLIN Potter. I attend Elite Scholars Academy, and I'm in 7th grade. My question for you is, how do you see your firm impacting classrooms across the city when it comes to literacy and addressing literacy inequities within the Black community?
I personally believe that literacy is one of the most important skills young students can develop. We've heard it said, it's kind of common wisdom that from kindergarten to 3rd grade, students learn to read. But from 3rd grade on, students read to learn. And if students haven't learned to read by the time they get into 3rd grade, then it's almost impossible for them to catch up. And we know, I think Jewel was talking about the school to prison pipeline. When kids fall behind grade level, then they become disinterested in school, and dropping out of school is certainly a marker for bad things later on in life. So I think it's vitally important as a community, as a legal community, that we help to promote literacy in schools. One of the things that our firm is doing, we work with an organization called Everybody Wins, and we partner with a great APS school, Dunbar Elementary. And we assign lawyers to kindergarten students to commit an hour a week to meet with those kids, to mentor them, and importantly, to read to them, to help develop those literacy skills that are so important for thriving throughout their entire lives.
Giving back to the community, it's an important tenet of pushing this forward about fairness, equality, and justice really for our students in schools. We're going to bring in Dr. Lisa Herring. She is the superintendent of one of the largest school districts really in the country and in the state of Georgia, Atlanta Public Schools. Dr. Herring, we have a 5th grader from APS has a question for you.
Good evening, Dr. Herring. My name is GILLAM, a 5th grader at Drew Charter School. And my question is, what role does literacy play when addressing racism in our communities?
Well, good evening again, Gillam, and thank you for your question. And regarding the role that literacy plays for addressing racism, equity, social justice in our community, it is the foundation that frees all of us. Literacy is what empowers us to not only be learners, but to be leaders. It's the basic foundation for freeing your mind, freeing your ability to think, giving you voice, giving you the words to stand tall, and giving you the words to lead. Whether you are male or female, it all starts with our ability not just to think it, but to say it and to compose it. And that's important. And it doesn't just start now. It started years and years ago when we didn't have the right to read. And now that we do, we must take full advantage of that. In its most basic definition, or the most basic understanding, literacy empowers us to be readers. Readers makes us leaders, and that gives us voice. And I think that's also important in a time where more than ever, we are seeing young people like yourself, Gillam, and young people like the scholars on this panel rise up, use their voice, and use their words. And that's the power. Literacy puts the power for you to use your words into full action. And you can address those things that are tied to injustice, that are tied to racism, and that are tied to inequities. And the best example of that tonight is what we're seeing is every single one of you exercise not only your right, but your gift to be not only a reader, because you know what these authors have composed, but you've taken those words and now you're using them to be powerful yourself. That's what literacy does.
Dr. Herring, this is your first year with APS. Welcome. And COVID-19 has certainly created a lot of challenges, but you also are dealing now also building bridges with the issue of diversity. We're going to bring in an 11th grader from Atlanta Public Schools with a question for you.
Hello, Dr. Herring. My name is KHAMAR Carlisle from DUCKETT High School. My question is, how do we bridge the gap of communication between home and school to continue conversations on healing as a community?
How do we bridge the gap so that we can build conversations between the school, the community, and home? KHAMAR, did I say that correctly, KHAMAR?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that question. Yes, sir. So it's interesting that you use the term bridging, or the word bridges, because quite honestly, it's very symbolic of what I believe helps connect us. Bridging is about connecting. And when it comes to human beings and our ability to connect, our words connect us, our feelings, our emotions. As it relates to an opportunity for us as educational leaders, for us as leaders, period, as people who are charged to take heed to help make education the power tool that it's supposed to be, we have to start by being available, being honest, being candid, and being accessible to students and to parents. I believe part of the art of communication is the willingness to sit down, to do it when we're celebrating, and also to do it when we're challenged, to do it when we agree, and to do it when we disagree. I believe that part of bridging is the spirit of coming to the table, whether it's physically and even today, virtually, sitting down and addressing issues or entertaining ideas. Beyond that, just in the day-to-day, KHAMAR, when you open up your mouth and you express how you feel about something as a student, as a high school student who's also thinking about the future, when you do that effectively with a teacher or with your principal, when you do it with your colleague or with your friend sitting beside you, when you do it with your family, and then you do it with all of those who are involved in education, we're building bridges. That's important. When there's an issue or a concern and no one's talking about it, and you take the lead, you or any of your peers on this panel, we're building bridges the moment we open our mouth and we invite others to be able to sit down and talk. So I think part of that communication and building community is what I've said earlier, being intentional around coming together, inviting, intentional invitation, inviting others to help gauge in the conversation and dialogue, regardless of where we fall on sides, whether we agree or disagree. And then knowing that from there, once you start a conversation, if there's a space to move into action, I think that makes a difference as well. And at the end of the day, in a world where we're all tied to devices, texting, social media as a form of communication, we don't write letters as much anymore. And sometimes even because we're connected so much to devices, when we sit in front of people, we forget how to just talk. I have to encourage and empower you to open your mouths and look individuals right in the eye and have conversations about all of the things that you think about, and allow that to be a space for us to build a community. As a school system, everything that we should do should be focused on how to invite our families in so that we can all wrap our arms around each of you as students so that you are successful. And where there are challenges and successes, we figure out how to have more successes and how to focus on coming out of challenges. So I could go on and on about that, but I will say I think it all starts with coming to the table, taking the lead to open up and to be willing to sit down with others.
You said it better than anyone else. Dr. Lisa Herring, the superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools. Thank you for your insight. We're going to bring Nancy Flake Johnson in. She's the president of Urban League of Greater Atlanta, one of the great civil rights organizations here in the Peach State. We have a 9th grader from Atlanta Public Schools with a question for you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Johnson. I'm Madison Fleming from Carver Early College.
Hello.
And my question is, when it comes to inequities in our communities, how can organizations like urban leagues get involved to help us heal and level the playing field for minorities in Metro Atlanta?
Well, I love that question because it's exactly why the Urban League movement exists today. We are here to support youth, adults, and families to connect to all the resources and tools that we need to be successful and to have the tools we need to overcome many of the barriers and the systemic racism that we know we will encounter. And so organizations like the Urban League, we help with education. It's one of our cornerstones. We help not only students, as we do with our partnership with Atlanta Public Schools, where we operate a college and career academy at Benjamin E. Mays and Booker T. Washington High Schools, where we work with students starting in the 9th grade, help you figure out what your passion, your purpose, what it is you want to do and be. And for those 4 years leading to graduation and beyond, we're there to support you, to expose you to all the possibilities, help you understand all your options as it relates to education after high school, and then to teach you to be a good citizen in your community by doing community service projects. We talk about civic engagement and how important it is to vote. And we support you to deal with any other personal things that you may have going on where you need support. And so that's one of the ways that we support. But we launched this year in 2020. We're celebrating 100 years of service to this community. And in celebration of that, we launched a financial empowerment center. And through this center, we help youth, adults, and families to do 3 very important things. First, we support you to be personally whole, healthy, and happy. We want to make sure anything that could possibly inhibit your success, that we help you address it, you and your family. The second thing we do is tap into your talents, and we help people figure out what is the best pathway for me to empower my household financially, and with all the tools we need, we help people pursue careers and start and grow businesses. And then the third and also important thing we do, we help people understand how to manage their money, grow their money, and build wealth. And wrapped around that, because we are a civil rights organization, we are huge advocates for civic engagement. And what I mean by that is how important it is that we exercise our right and the power of our vote. And that has never been more important than it is right here, right now, in this day. So that's what we do, and we work with all kinds of partners like Atlanta Public Schools. We work with other community-based organizations, and we're just here to be an advocate. And one more thing, we're also advocates for the passage of laws and the striking down of laws that strike down laws that oppress people, Black people and people of color, and anyone. And we're also here to advocate for laws that open up the doors of opportunity so that every person can be treated with dignity and fairness. So we do a lot, but we're here. We love to collaborate, and we love to support youth, adults, and families to succeed.
We appreciate that insight. Nancy Flake Johnson, the president of Urban League of Greater Atlanta. You mentioned something very powerful. I am a keen supporter of that, and that's economic empowerment. We could not have this panel without including commerce. So we have a great friend to the community, UPS. We have Janet STOVALL. She's the executive communications manager. We have a 9th grader from Atlanta Public Schools with a question for you.
Hello, Miss STOVALL. Hope I'm saying it right. My name is Justin Johnson. I am a freshman from Carver Early College, and my question for you today is: as civil unrest continues throughout our country, conversations like this will continue to happen. How can business partners support these opportunities that help us to better understand each other?
Well, Justin, I am so glad you asked me that question, because one of the biggest statements that I really believe in is that I believe business can help move the needle on racial injustice probably better than any other entity out there, because we have two big things: a lot of people and a lot of money. And UPS is a huge company. So I think when we talk about how we can help in conversations, there are a couple of ways. We can help first by making it possible for our people within organizations, those of us who work together, to have courageous conversations. And a lot of the civil unrest that's happening right now has pushed a lot of companies into thinking about that and having those conversations that they just never had before. And there are situations where we hire people. For example, UPS has got a group that's coming in right now. We built a whole Equity, Justice, and Action task force. That task force is going to facilitate some courageous conversations where people within the company speak to each other. So we can fix ourselves inside our own walls. And when we leave and come out and go home, go to church, get involved in our communities, the conversations that we have within our own walls help change things outside of our walls. But also, when you have a company that's big like UPS, we have 500,000 employees around the world. We can help convene other people. So the UPS Foundation, which is our philanthropic arm, works with a bunch of different organizations, nonprofits within the community. We are a great convener. So, for example, we work with the HBCUs in the area, Clark Atlanta University, Spelman, Morehouse, and we have a scholarship program. So we give 30 students scholarships every year. And part of what they have to do is they have to agree to tutor 150 hours within Fickett Elementary. And they tutor 2nd to 5th grade. They do reading, math, reading. So they work with them, they talk to them, they help them. And think about the books they're reading. Think about the conversations that they can start. Well, guess what? I'm willing to bet, I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet right about now, some of the books they're reading are some about the authors that are on this call. Think about the conversations that they can make happen. And since this program started, they've given over 246,000 hours just to that one school working with kids. So we can do that because we got a lot of people. We got a lot of people, and we have the ability to mobilize them to expand our reach by working with our partners. And then, the reality is we're a big company. We have money. We can put money into the community. We can support programs. We can support events like this. We can buy books. There's a whole lot that companies can do. We just have to decide that we want to be a part of these conversations, and then we can facilitate those conversations inside, and we can support those conversations continuing outside. And I believe that is the biggest thing that business can do to our community.
Diversity and inclusion is important. We want to thank our authors, our educators, our students who ask bold and full of life questions that may have been scary to ask, but you had the courage to do so. That creates what we're trying to do, have dialogue here. And also to our attorney and of course Commerce with UPS and the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. We thank you so much for your time, your insight, and for your valuable wisdom that you shared. We also want to take a minute to thank all of our sponsors. Page Turners make great learners, Urban League of Greater Atlanta, UPS, Alston and Bird, and Atlanta Public Schools. For more information on the books shared by the authors and ways to keep this conversation going at home, visit pageturnersmakegreatlearners.org and racetoread.org. We'll have all of the information posted at CBS46.com as well. Thank you so much and take care.